Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the I Know About Sports podcast. I'm your host, Noah Arnold. It is Monday, November 25th, 2024. It is Thanksgiving week, final weekend of the college football regular season, Rivalry week. That means this will be the only episode I'll be releasing this week because I'm not going to have one on Thanksgiving. And so it will be a super, super long episode. My dog Tater is, so you may hear him wagging his tail for some reason. I don't know what he's doing. He's a weirdo. He's a big old weirdo. So yeah, I'll be combining my rankings and predictions and everything this week. It's going to be a really long one. Hopefully Tater will be sitting here and be all good. Be a good little boy. Last week I did terrible. I did awful. 3-7. This is my worst I think I may have ever done in predictions ever, point blank period. And hit that button. On the season, I'm now 91-46. Not the best season. Or not the best week. It's gonna make my season look really bad. But hey, gotta do what you gotta do. So yeah, I have my predictions last this week, and I do rankings and other stuff before my predictions. Just kind of give a setup to what this weekend's going to look like. Obviously, I'm filming this before the actual playoff polls come out Tuesday night, so I won't have that to base it on any of my rankings or anything else. And I'm also getting this done way before most other places are even having their predictions on the game. So, you get an exclusive early access, I guess. Sure. That being said, let's get to the rankings. My own personal rankings. This is not a prediction of what I think is going to happen. This is just my personal rankings. I still have Oregon number one. Had a bye week last week. They play Washington this week, and then they play in the Big Ten championship game. The Ducks are the only team whose playoff spot is guaranteed regardless what the outcomes are the next 2 weeks. Number two, still Ohio State. They dominated the Hoosiers on Saturday. Now they're sitting pretty likely in the playoffs, whether or not they beat Michigan or win the Big 12 or the Big 10. And honestly, they look like they're the best team in America, and that's why they have the best odds to win the national championship as of now. Ohio State is the best team in the country. They're just not number one because of that loss to Oregon earlier in the season. Number three, still Texas for me. They had a win over Kentucky where they once again had a slow start when they pulled away late. Maybe they were looking ahead to the A&M game the last couple weeks. But yeah, the reason number three is because of pure eye test. They have one of the worst resumes in the SEC. They have yet to beat a single SEC team with a winning conference record. So really bad resume for Texas, but they look like they're one of the best teams in America. So I'm going to put them and rank them as one of the best teams in America. Number four, Penn State. They escaped Minnesota with a 1-point victory after a ballsy fake punt to win the game, essentially, for the Nittany Lions. So they stay alive for the playoffs. All they have to do is just beat a really crappy Maryland team this week, and they're in the playoffs, likely with a home playoff game for the Nittany Lions. Number five, the team I have jumped up the most is Notre Dame. All season, ever since the NIU loss, I was down on Notre Dame. I ranked them way lower than what everywhere else ranked them. But now, after that huge victory over Army 49-14, a top 20 Army team, I just have to admit it, outside of the NIU game, they have been probably one of the 5 to 3 best teams in the country. They have just won and won convincingly over everybody else they've played. Outside of the NIU game, which is one of the most inexplicable games I have ever seen in college football. All Notre Dame has to do this week is beat USC in Los Angeles, and they have a home playoff game. Imagine saying that after they lost to Northern Illinois. But yeah, so as I said, Notre Dame 5 for me. I could honestly, if somebody wanted to rank Notre Dame as high as 3, I would listen to it. But they're still number 5 because they're still beneath Texas and Penn State, even though they've looked better than both of those teams, just because of that loss to NIU. Still in the back of my mind. Number 6, the highest ranked 2-loss team, the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia had a weird victory over UMass this week where the Minutemen put up a way better fight than anybody expected. Regardless of the outcome of that game, Georgia has now clinched a spot in the SEC title game due to Alabama getting crapped on by Oklahoma. So regardless of what happens this Friday night against Georgia Tech, the Bulldogs are in the SEC championship with a spot in the college football playoff on the line. And Georgia will be playing the winner of the Lone Star Showdown between Texas and Texas A&M. Number 7, the highest-ranked ACC team is Miami. A final score of 42-14 over Wake Forest. Looks like they may have blew out the Demon Deacons. But if you actually watch that game, it was way closer than the final score seemingly said. Wake Forest put up a really good fight in this one. And the Hurricanes have looked pedestrian pretty much all season. They're on the road at Syracuse this week. If they win that, they're heading to Charlotte to play SMU in the ACC championship game. If Miami loses to Syracuse, Clemson takes their spot to play SMU in the ACC championship game. Speaking of SMU, let's talk about the Mustangs. They dominated Virginia 33-7. And now in their first season at the power level, their first season in the Atlantic Coast Conference, SMU is playing in the title game, and they're undefeated in conference play as well. Sensational year by SMU. They will not even be making money off of this for like the next, I think, 5 years, whatever deal they signed with the ACC was, to take them at an extremely discounted rate. Essentially, SMU is paying to play in the ACC, and now essentially they're winning too. This week, all they have to do is beat a tricky Cal team that has proven to, be a pretty tricky team to play. And they're going to be playing either Miami or Clemson and Charlotte, regardless of if they win or not. But if they beat Cal and then beat, let's say, Miami, SMU is going to be in a spot to maybe in an argument to get the number 2 seed in the playoffs. Maybe the second best team in the country, if they can pull that one off. Number 9, Tennessee. Out of all the chaos that happened this week, Tennessee might be one of the biggest winners due to the chaos. They went from a team that I had on the bubble to one of the first teams out to now they have fully plant their feet down, plant their heels down in the playoffs, at the lower tier of the playoffs, but still in nonetheless. All they have to do is just beat Vanderbilt this week. That's all you got to do. Just beat the Commodores, and you're in the playoffs. Now, Vandy has been a tricky team to play, but that's all you have to do. One game and you're in. It looked like Tennessee may need some help go their way. But all they had to do was just keep winning, and everybody else just lost. Simple as that for the Volunteers. Another team that won this weekend, despite getting destroyed, is Indiana. The reason I said they lost, or they won, was going into the week, everybody said, including myself, that all Indiana had to do was just not get blown out by Ohio State and during the playoffs. Indiana got blown out of the building by Ohio State, and yet because everybody else beneath them also lost, and some of them lost in blowout fashion like Alabama, Indiana could stay in the playoffs despite that blowout. Granted, they are right on the edge of the playoffs. They are right on the edge. But all they have to do is just beat Purdue, who is 1-10 and one of the worst teams in America, and they could still get in the playoffs. Likely will still get in the playoffs. So, despite everything going wrong for the Hoosiers, they still managed to pull it off and make the playoffs. Wild. Number 11, another team that benefited from the chaos, or actually one of the teams that caused the chaos, is the 11th ranked Arizona State Sun Devils. Well, I have number 11. They have been one of the biggest Cinderella teams all season. They were picked to finish dead last in their conference and is now just one win away against their rivals, Arizona, from the Big 12 championship game. And if they win that, they're heading to the playoffs with a first-round bye. All they had to do was beat BYU, and they beat them in one of the craziest games all season. And just incredible season for the Sun Devils. If you didn't see this game against BYU, Arizona State was up huge. BYU came all the way back, but Arizona State had the ball with about 5 or 6 seconds left in the game on fourth down, so they just ran out. They chucked the ball as high as they could, so the clock would run down, and it would be it. So the clock hit zeros, game was over. Everybody stormed the field in Tempe, Arizona. They were celebrating. However, after replay review, it was determined that there was 1 second on the clock, which if you saw the replay, there was 1 second on the clock. They had to get 20,000 people off the field, and it took about 20 minutes for them to do so. Get them off the field just enough so they can play one more play, and BYU ended up coming up like 3 yards short. So it took them 20 minutes to play 1 second of game time, and they had to rush the field again to celebrate again the second time. If BYU managed to get a Hail Mary and beat Arizona State with everybody still kind of on the field, it would have been a riot. It would have been a riot in Tempe, but that didn't happen. Arizona State pulled off the win and is now just 2 wins away from the college football playoffs after looking like they were going to be one of the worst teams in the country. Number 12, I have Boise State. They survived a scare in Wyoming over a 2-8 team, and they have clinched a spot in the Mountain West Championship game. And if they win that, they're in the playoffs. But they might not have a first-round bye due to how pedestrian they've played the last couple weeks. Ashton Genty may have clinched himself a Heisman this week with a 169-yard performance in a game he was hurt for a good chunk of the second half. But yeah, now all Boise, they were thinking they could get a first-round bye. Now they're just hoping, hey, can we at least just make the playoffs? But if they win out, they're in. Pretty simple. Number 13, I have South Carolina. Before the week started, I said Carolina probably had no shot to make the play, or no huge shot to make the playoffs, just because they needed so much to go right to make it. And then everything went right for South Carolina to make it. So many teams lost in front of South Carolina, and everybody needed to lose, lost. And now Carolina is 1 win away against a really damn good Clemson team, and they're going to the playoffs. Imagine saying at the start of the season, the Palmetto Bowl would be a playoff-type game. Yeah, so Carolina, just everything's gone right. Now, maybe they need some stuff to go right still for them to make it. Like maybe another team still has to lose, but for all intents and purposes, South Carolina looks to be right there on the edge of the college football playoffs. Number 14, a team that actually beat South Carolina, I have Alabama. The Tide's SEC championship chances went up in smoke, and maybe their playoff chances went up in smoke as they got killed by Oklahoma, a really crappy Oklahoma team. The Tide, their last game, their only remaining game is Auburn, and Auburn's not, even though they just beat A&M, not a great team. And so that means they don't have another chance to get a signature victory, another big victory. And I think that likely is doomed for the Tide, as they will not have a chance to say, hey, well, we lost to this crappy team, but we ended up turning around and beating a really good team in response. They don't have that opportunity. They don't have that chance. And I think that's likely going to mean doom and gloom for the Crimson Tide. Now, they're not fully eliminated yet, but more than likely they're done. Number 15, the team that will be playing South Carolina Saturday, I have the Clemson Tigers. I have Clemson ranked a little lower than most because they haven't beaten or even played good when they've played a good team. They got smoked by Georgia. They got handled by Louisville at home, and they survived Pitt with a backup quarterback. But this Saturday, Clemson could jump their way into the playoffs if they could get a signature victory over a really good South Carolina team. And if Miami loses to Syracuse, Clemson would get a chance to go to Charlotte to play for the ACC championship game. And the thing is, Clemson could still technically lose to South Carolina and then make the ACC championship game and then make the playoffs because they won the ACC. So Clemson has the most variability about what could happen on Saturday. So either they could have the best case scenario for Clemson, beat Carolina, make the ACC championship game, beat SMU, and then get a first round bye, or Clemson could lose to Carolina and have Miami win, and they're fully done. So even with a loss to Carolina, Clemson would not be fully eliminated until after after Miami-Syracuse game, which is coming on immediately following the Clemson-Carolina game. So Clemson just has so much stuff heading into the number 16, a team I have fully eliminated, Ole Miss. This was one of the most disappointing teams in college football, which, we all kind of saw coming. They just never clicked. They never clicked this year besides maybe the Georgia game. They've just been meh. They've been meh. They lost in Gainesville. Jackson Dart had one of the worst collapses you will ever see. He threw 3 interceptions in the final minute of the game to lose it for Ole Miss. And their playoff chances are now done after this. But the thing is, Lane Kiffin said that SEC teams would probably want to duck playing in the SEC championship game so they wouldn't have to play in that game and they wouldn't have to lose that game. Luckily for Lane Kiffin, he won't have to duck playing the SEC championship game because he never got an invite in the first damn place. So, good job for Lane Kiffin. Couldn't happen to a better guy. Number 17, a team that has suffered back-to-back losses, I have BYU. They've lost 2 insanely close games that could have gone either way. First to Kansas and then now to Arizona State. Their playoff chances and Big 12 title chances are hanging on by a thread. But they're not all the way out of it. If Kansas State pulls off the victory against Iowa State in Farmageddon, which isn't impossible, they would just have to beat Houston, and then they would go to the Big 12 championship game still, and a chance to still go to the playoffs. The Big 12 is just a wild conference, and it's so good. I love the Big 12, and they're just weird shit. So BYU still gets a chance, but Number 18, Iowa State. The Cyclones have played their way into just being 1 win away from the Big 12 title game and then another victory away from the playoffs. They survived Utah this past week off a missed field goal. I mean, they survived. If the Cyclones can just beat Kansas State this week in prime time, they're going to have a chance to go to the playoffs somehow. This is not a great Iowa State team. Out of all the Iowa State teams in the Matt Campbell era, this is one of their weaker ones, and yet this is the one that could go all the way. Crazy. Number 19, Tulane. The Green Wave had a bye this past week and now look to lock up a spot in the AAC championship game against Army. Oh, they've already locked up a spot against Army in the American championship game. On Thanksgiving night, they still have to play a really good Memphis team. Where if they win that one and they beat an Army team who's 11 or 10-1, they may have a decent argument to be in over Boise State. They would at least have an argument if they can win the next 2 games. Number 20, Texas A&M, a 4 overtime loss at a really bad Army team. The Aggies are now on death's door, basically. They have to knock off Texas this week, and then they have to turn around and beat Georgia the week after to make the playoffs. They can't afford to lose either of those 2 games. And I'm sorry to say this, but They're not doing either. Good luck, Texas A&M. Good first season, though, under Mike Elko, but rough end of the stick. Number 21, UNLV. The Rebels caught a massive break with Fresno State's victory over Colorado State, meaning all UNLV has to do is handle their business over Nevada this week, and they're going to rematch against Boise State in the Mountain West Championship game and avenge their loss from earlier in the season. UNLV went from just off that one victory where Fresno State beat Colorado State to where they went from playoff long shots to playoff hopefuls. And they may control their own destiny because, I don't know, UNLV versus Tulane. That's a pretty intriguing argument about who's in, who's out. Number 22, Colorado. Well, the Buffs went from controlling their own destiny to needing a lot of stuff to go right to even make the Big 12 championship game. Yeah, really rough time there for Colorado. They lost to one of the hottest teams in America in Kansas, who just continues to cause chaos all throughout the land. For Colorado to still make the Big 12 title game, which they would need to do to make the playoffs, the Buffs need 2 of these 3 teams to lose. Well, first off, Colorado has to beat Oklahoma State on Black Friday, but obviously they have to win, obviously. But then they need either 2 of the 3, BYU, Iowa State, Arizona State. They need 2 of those 3 teams to lose Saturday to make the Big 12 championship game. I don't know if you get... I mean, that's not impossible odds. It's not great odds for Colorado. But one of the biggest turnarounds in college football regardless. And unfortunately, I think Travis Hunter's playoff chances rely heavily on if he makes the playoffs or not. At least in my opinion. Number 23, I have Kansas State. They dominated Cincinnati this week, sets up a very intriguing Farmageddon against Iowa State. The Wildcats technically could still make the Big 12 championship game and the playoffs, the same way I could technically win the lottery. Not great odds. Odds are still there, technically. Number 24, I still have Memphis here. They had a bye last week. Sets up a huge showdown on Thanksgiving night against Tulane. Obviously, Memphis cannot make the American Championship game, but a 10-2 record with a win over a top 20 team that could still win the conference is a pretty good look for Memphis. So they can set themselves up for a very nice bowl game. Number 25 is Army. We were all rooting for the troops on Saturday night to knock the Irish out of the playoffs and completely flip the playoffs upside down. But then they got utterly destroyed. This was the worst loss Army has taken since the Vietnam War, and their playoff chances look incredibly low at the moment, even if they manage to beat Tulane in the AAC championship game. So, to recap it off, I know that was a lot. I have Oregon, number 1, Ohio State, number 2, Texas, number 3, Penn State, 4, Notre Dame, 5, Georgia, 6, Miami, 7, SMU at 8, Tennessee at 9, Indiana at 10, Arizona State at 11, Boise State at 12, South Carolina at 13, Alabama at 14, Clemson at 15, Iowa State at 16, BYU at 17, Iowa State at 18, Tulane at 19, Texas A&M at 20, UNLV at 21, Colorado at 22, Kansas State at 23, Memphis at 24, and Army at 25. So if the playoffs started, let's say tomorrow, my current projections, not my predictions, but if we were to go off the rankings real quick, based on how high teams in the conference or whatever, it would be Oregon would have number 1 seed in a first round bye. Texas would have the 2 seed with the bye. Miami would have the 3 seed because I have them ranked higher than SMU. Just the way it shapes out. And then the 4 seed would be Arizona State. The 5 seed would be Ohio State. Penn State 6 seed. Notre Dame 7 seed. Georgia, the 8 seed, SMU, the 9 seed, Tennessee at 10, Indiana at 11, and Boise State at 12, which sets up a playoff bracket, well, at least a first round that has Ohio State playing Boise. Pretty intriguing matchup. Texas would get matched up with, not Texas, Penn State, I believe it's matched up with Indiana, if my math is mathing. Notre Dame would get a home game against Tennessee, and Georgia would also get a home playoff game against SMU. So pretty solid playoffs there. Last week, I talked about the 4 and 6 teams that needed to go all the way. But now, final week of the season, there are multiple 5 and 6 teams. Let me count real quick. I probably should have counted before I started recording, but whatever. Tater, why you kick me? Yeah, there are 15. Thank you for those that threw it. There are 15 teams that are fighting to make a bowl game in the final week of the season. Obviously, if you're new to college football, you need 6 victories. You need 6 wins on the season to make a postseason game, a bowl game, which gives you more practices with your team, a big payday for the school, and a nationally exposed game where you're fighting for a bowl trophy with the country watching you. We're going to go through this by conference, just by alphabetical order in the conferences. So we're going to start with the American Conference. There was only one team that's still fighting for bowl as a chance to make bowl eligibility still, and that's North Texas. The Mean Green have utterly collapsed second half of the season, but luckily they get matched up with a really bad Temple team this week to get that elusive 6th win. So North Texas looked like they had something to start the season. They've fallen off since. In the ACC, there are a pretty intriguing 3 teams that are fighting for bowl eligibility still, but only at most 2 will make it, at the most. Because Virginia and Virginia Tech are both playing each other this week and are both 5 and 6. The winner of the Virginia Tech game will be in a bowl game, so that just adds so much fuel to the fire this week. And we're going to start with Virginia first. The Cavaliers have had a rough last couple years with Tony Elliott as a coach, both on and off the field, with having to rebuild the whole program from the scratch, essentially, with the off-the-field tragedies. It has just been a rough time for the Cavaliers, but a victory over Virginia Tech, or their arch rivals, to make a bowl game would go a long, long way for the Cavaliers. To the other side, it's a much different feeling on the Hokie side. While Virginia would be happy to get a spot in a bowl game, the Hokies were expected to be dark horse playoff contenders this season, and now we're just fighting to make a bowl game in the last week of the season. So on one side, the Cavaliers side, it is hope, optimism, happiness, fire. And on Virginia Tech, it is dread, sadness, and disappointment. We'll see how that plays out Saturday night. NC State is the other team in the ACC still fighting for bowl eligibility. To say this season has been a disaster in Raleigh is putting it lightly. They've had heartbreaking loss here, heartbreaking loss there, big injury to a star player there. Their big-time quarterback transfer retires. Blowout loss to that team. In this team, it has just been disaster in NC State. They have to beat their arch rival and fellow disappointment, UNC, this week to make a bowl game. Dave Dorian's seat is a little warm at the moment in Raleigh, North Carolina. In the Big 12, there are 2 teams that are still on the cusp of making a bowl game. We're going to start with the Kansas Jayhawks. They have been the joker of the college football season. Their only purpose is to spread chaos and misery onto others. And they have a chance to do it again to a Baylor team that's still right there on the edge of the Big 12 championship game and technically the playoffs as well. The Jayhawks started the season in the top 20, 1-0. They lost 5 in a row to start their season 1-5. They had to claw their way back to where they are now, and they have become the first sub-500 team in history to beat 3 straight top 20 teams. So the Jayhawks have just been chaos makers of the college football season, and it is so enjoyable to watch. The other team, a team that kind of had a polar opposite approach to Kansas. While Kansas got off to a rough start after super high expectations, the Bearcats had super low expectations with a hot start. They started the season 5-2. They were the last team to beat Arizona State. But since they beat Arizona State, they've lost 4 in a row. A lot of those are to blowouts in the last 2 games. Now they need to knock off a TCU team this week to avoid losing 5 in a row and missing out on a bowl game, which would be a complete disaster and a complete embarrassment for the Cincinnati program that looked like they were trying to make some of themselves this season. In the Big Ten, 2 teams still fighting for that elusive bowl game. Wisconsin, much like Cincinnati, the Badgers started 5-2 despite a bunch of stuff not going their way to start the season, but has since lost their last 4 games, and a good chunk of those haven't even been close. Now they need a Black Friday victory over Minnesota in the Battle of Paul Bunyan's axe to make it. The other team is Michigan State. They've had an up and down season in Coach Smith's first year since taking over what's been a dumpster fire in East Lansing. A victory over Rutgers, get that elusive 6 victory, would go a long way for the Spartans and would be an incredible turnaround for Coach Smith in just his first season at the helm in East Lansing, taking over for the dumpster fire that he took over, left by Mel Tucker. In the MAC, it is very intriguing. Much like the ACC, they only have 2 teams that are fighting for that bowl spot, and it's 2 teams that will be playing each other, Western Michigan and Eastern Michigan. The Broncos and both teams have had very similar seasons. The Broncos started 5-3. They've lost 3 in a row to get to this point. Their cross-state rivals, Eastern Michigan, started 5-2 and have lost 4 in a row. Well, this Saturday in Kalamazoo, Michigan, somebody's got to win. Somebody's got to go to a bowl game. Somebody has to lose their losing streak, or have to end their losing streak. Whatever way you want to look at it. The Mountain West has 1 team still fighting for bowl eligibility, and it is New Mexico. The Lobos, last game they played, they beat a top 20 team for the first time in program history, which was Washington State. Now they travel to Hawaii to take on an athletic program and just university at large in disarray. If you haven't kept up with the Hawaii story, the whole university is dealing with a whole lot of fallout and just disarray with a new president coming in. The athletic director is just weird. It's new president. It's just been a complete shit show on the island. And that after this last year at the wildfire, this has been tough sledding for Hawaii, and they just don't need any more of this happening. But New Mexico's trying to get that bowl game, though, in Honolulu this Saturday night, late Saturday night. The Pac-12 has, there's only 2 teams in the Pac-12. It says 12, so I call it 2-Pac. Oregon State, they went into last week 4-6 in the 2-Pac championship game against Washington State, and they pulled off the upset there. Now they have to go on the road, pull off another upset on Black Friday against Boise State to make a bowl game. And it's a Black Friday game that will be kicking off at 9 a.m. local time. Why on earth is this game being played at 9 a.m. local time? Who decided this? Granted, it's noon for me, but for the fans out there, it's 9 a.m. Who decided that was going to happen? Anyways, Oregon State could cause a lot of chaos if they can manage to beat Boise State. For the playoff committee, it will be crazy. SEC, speaking of teams that I've called chaos, Auburn put off a massive upset over Texas A&M this past week, and it contributed to the chaos of Week 13 of the CFB season. Now the Tigers must upset a reeling Alabama team in the Iron Bowl to make it to a bowl game, and which would be the first in the Hugh Freeze era. So easier said than done for Auburn. In the Sun Belt, they have two teams still fighting. App State, they have one less game played than everybody else. They're currently 5-5 rather than 5-6. That's because they had a game canceled due to the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene onto the Boone area. So if they can make a bowl game after all that, it would be an incredible season, and would be one of the best stories of the college football season if App State can manage to make it. Louisiana Monroe is the other team. Early in the season, the Warhawks were off to a crazy start for a historically bad program. 5-1 to start. Their only loss coming to Texas. And you think, oh crap, maybe the Warhawks, one of the worst programs in America, could manage to make the playoffs, maybe win the Sun Belt. Who knows? Since their 5-1 start, they've lost 5 in a row, and now have to play the Bayou Brawl against Louisiana, their arch rivals this week, who is looking to not only win the Sun Belt, win their 10th game of the season. It's going to be... sorry, UL Monroe. Damn, they're going to lose 6 in a row when they look like they're off to a 5-1 start and look like they were getting ready to have one of the best seasons in program history. So really rough one there for the Warhawks. So recap, the 15 teams still trying to fight for that bowl spot in the last week of the season is North Texas out of the American, Virginia Tech, and NC State out of the ACC. And, of course, one of those, at minimum, one is guaranteed due to Virginia and Virginia Tech playing. The Big 12 has Kansas and Cincinnati. The Big 10 has Wisconsin and Michigan State. The MAC is guaranteed to get one of those two teams in, and one of those left out. Western Michigan and Eastern Michigan play. The Mountain West has New Mexico still fighting. The Pac-12 has Oregon State. The SEC has Auburn. And the Sun Belt has App State and Louisiana Monroe. So my actual predictions, I know most of the time I do 20 game predictions for Rivalry Week, but for the show, because it's already a pretty long episode, I'm just going to do the 10 games, kind of break my own tradition I started on my Twitter for it. But I may still have 20 games just on Twitter, but I'm not going to talk about 20 games here just because it's already a pretty long episode. We're going to start Thanksgiving night, Memphis and Tulane, but maybe a top 25 matchup. I just think Tulane matches up really well against this Memphis team that has been beat up by physicality throughout the season. And I think they're going to be the downfall again. I think Tulane's run game is too good. I think they pull this one off Thanksgiving night against Memphis to get the 10-2 on the season. Georgia Tech. I don't really think I need to go too much in depth on this one. Georgia Tech has been a upset-hungry team, but they've had quarterback injuries the last couple weeks to Haynes King. They have to play a Georgia team that's going to be red hot in Athens at night. I just don't think there's a shot that the Yellow Jackets have of winning this one. I'm going with Georgia big in this one. Michigan, Ohio State, another game. Usually this is an all-time playoff-type matchup, but Michigan State has just had a really down year. They don't have a quarterback, really, all season. And if this is going to be competitive, if Ryan Day manages to lose this game, he's getting fired. Without question, if he loses to this Michigan team, after all the other times he's lost to Michigan, and if he still loses to the crappy one, at home no less, he will not have a job. So I'm going with Ohio State big. Tennessee, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's been a really tricky team to play all season. However, Tennessee matches up very well with Vanderbilt. Because Vanderbilt always wins by physicality, and dominate the time possession. And that's where Tennessee thrives at. So I think Tennessee just matches up well with Vandy. I'm going with the Volunteers to win this one. But if Vandy wins, that knocks Tennessee out of the playoffs, and it creates a huge hole for a bunch of teams to maybe try and sneak back up into that top 12. What might be the biggest game of the weekend, it's a playoff game. South Carolina, Clemson, the biggest Palmetto Bowl in history. Playoffs on the line. And yet for some, it's at noon, and game day will not be there because Clemson pissed off ESPN because they didn't want to play on Black Friday. Go figure. This game could go in a million different directions. If you ask me in 5 minutes who I think's winning this game, it could change. After 10 minutes, I could also change. This is the most back and forth I've ever gone on South Carolina Clemson games in my lifetime. But as of now, as of this very moment, I'm picking South Carolina to pull it off in Death Valley over Clemson. I think South Carolina just matches up very well with Clemson, who has struggled stopping the run, has struggled with mobile quarterbacks all season, and over the last couple of years as well. And it's a noon game, being the crowds are going to be as hyped as they normally would be. And that favors South Carolina as well. Clemson still has an easy shot to win this game as well. They have great playmakers on the outside against a Carolina secondary that has been up and down, to say the least. Sellers is turnover prone as well. But I just don't think Kate Klubnik and this Clemson offense can provide. And this makeshift O-line is going to. This makeshift O-line is getting punched in the mouth by this Carolina defensive front. So it's going to be a very close, very competitive game for all four quarters. But Clemson's going to pull this one out in Tiger Town. Or not, Carolina's going to pull this one out in Tiger Town. See, I'm just flipping back and forth as I'm picking. This is going to be the game of the weekend in college football. And nobody would have said that after week one, where South Carolina barely beat Old Dominion and Clemson got shit on by Georgia. Nobody would have thought that this would be where we're at. And I said, both teams have a good path to win this game. But as of now, I'm picking South Carolina. Moving on to the 3:30 slate, Notre Dame, USC. Notre Dame has been one of the best teams in America. USC has not been. Irish roll big in the City of Angels. Simple as that. Backup quarterback for the Trojans as well. They looked terrible against UCLA a week ago. And yeah, USC's just doesn't match up well with Notre Dame at all. Auburn, Alabama. Auburn got the victory last week. However, I think the magic of Jordan Hare in November helped Auburn tremendously a week ago. They're not going to have that in Tuscaloosa. Tide are going to roll big in this one. And are going to want to make a statement, going to want to run the score up as well to try and still say, hey, we should still be in the playoffs. Miami, Syracuse. The Hurricanes just need to win this one to go to the ACC Championship game and maybe even go to the playoffs. However, I'm picking Syracuse. I think this is going to look to make a big statement victory in the first season with Fran Brown at the helm. Kyle McCord is going to put a statement out there to the college football world that Ohio State gave up on him way too soon, and it was not his fault last season. I'm picking Syracuse to pull off a program-changing victory this Saturday in upstate New York in the Carrier Dome. Texas A&M. This looked like it was going to be one of the biggest games of the college football season. Now looks very dampered after the Aggies' loss to Auburn a week ago. Granted, this game is going to be an SEC title game or title playoff game, as the winner of this game will be playing in Atlanta over against Georgia. But even before the upset, I picked Texas, and I'm still going with Texas despite Quinn Ewers being banged up. I think Longhorns get this one out against the Aggies. And Texas will go 11-1 and will be playing Georgia in a rematch of the regular season in the SEC championship game. Final game we're going to be talking about is Farmageddon. Kansas State, Iowa State. Chaos has once again transcended on the Big 12. And I think Kansas State takes down Iowa State It knocks them out of playoff contention. I think Avery Johnson is going to be the best player on the field. I think Kansas State is just by far the better team. I don't buy Iowa State at all as a legit threat. They just match up well in every facet of the game. And I think Kansas State pulls this one out. And we're going to see what that means for the Big 12 title contention. And that may open the door for Colorado, may open the door for BYU. We will find out. But to recap this predictions in this pretty long episode, I will have Tulane over Memphis, Georgia over Georgia Tech, Ohio State over Michigan, Tennessee over Vanderbilt, South Carolina over Clemson, Notre Dame over USC, Auburn over Alabama, Syracuse over Miami, Texas over Texas A&M, and Kansas State over Iowa State. So, that all being said, a super episode this week. But it's been a blast so far this season. We still got a whole lot of season left to go. So for the holidays, for Thanksgiving, for this podcast, thank you all. Have a good holiday. Spend time with your family. Eat a whole lot. Don't worry about going to the gym. Be a big back. Do what you do. For me and for Tater, who has been laying here, taking a nap this whole episode, I say thank you, happy holidays, and goodbye.